Okay, so like, imagine this, right? The ancient
Hmm.
world. You picture all those togas, those basic temples.
Right.
But what if they also had technology uh, so advanced that we're only now beginning to catch up?
Hmm.
That's exactly what this deep dive is all about. We got this fascinating collection of articles and excerpts from you, and well, let's just say we went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Deep, deep
And
down.
let me tell you, get ready for some serious mind-blowing moments
Hmm.
because the past might be way more high-tech and way more mysterious than you ever thought.
That's right. For this deep dive, we focus on the evidence you sent us, stuff pointing to advanced technology maybe existing in antiquity.
Yeah, some pretty wild articles and snippets really made us think.
For sure.
So our mission today is to break it all down for you. We want you to understand the key arguments and evidence, look at different perspectives presented in the sources, and basically leave this deep dive feeling intrigued,
Hmm.
not overwhelmed by all this potentially paradigm-shifting information.
Absolutely. And just to get you even more curious, we're going to touch on some specific areas we found super interesting in your sources.
Yeah, get ready for a wild ride through sophisticated sanitation, precision engineering, the possibility of, like, ancient flight, and even evidence of powerful energy sources they might have had.
Who knows? Maybe they even had smartphones.
Oh, maybe. So to kick things off, let's unpack this whole thing by starting with something that might not immediately scream cutting-edge technology,
All right.
right? Sewage and plumbing.
Right.
But your sources brought up some examples that are pretty mind-blowing,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
starting with the Persian aqueducts, or qanats.
Mhm.
Engineering feats from like 3,000 years ago, still working today, supplying a whopping 75% of Iran's water, according to a 1968 Scientific American article.
Yeah. That just shows you the durability and intelligence behind these underground structures. Pretty
Yeah,
impressive, right?
totally.
Hmm.
And it's wild to contrast this with Europe, which basically spent centuries with open sewers. Your sources mention how this lack of sanitation led to some of those horrific plagues that nearly wiped people out.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy to think about.
Meanwhile, in ancient Egypt, things were quite different.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Your sources talk about paved streets with stone drainage channels to collect wastewater. They even found a well-preserved toilet, like a real toilet, in Tel El Amarna, in the house of some high-ranking official from the 18th dynasty, with a limestone lid.
Imagine that, right? The guy sitting there doing his business and he's got a fancy toilet lid.
It's crazy to think about. And Herodotus, who wasn't exactly a dummy, he actually believed the Egyptians were the healthiest people because of this focus on cleanliness.
Yeah, your sources mention that. Seems like for them, being clean was practically a religion.
Totally. And it didn't stop there. They knew how to make drains out of hammered copper,
Right.
like that 411-meter one they found at the Temple of Sahara,
Though that one was used for rainwater.
right, for rainwater. And water was so important that one of the highest positions in government, the vizier in the 18th dynasty, was responsible for managing the water supply for the whole region.
Yeah, the inscriptions talk about that. He was like the ultimate plumber in chief.
So it's pretty clear that the idea of the ancient world being backward in every way doesn't really hold up, at least when we're talking about sanitation in some civilizations.
Yeah, definitely not.
But let's shift gears now and talk about some other technological innovations your sources mention.
So the thing is, many inventions that we consider modern, like, steam engines, clocks, automatic machines, hydraulic pumps, they already existed in the ancient world.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And even the Antikythera mechanism, which we'll get into more detail later, is an example of such a sophisticated tool that archaeologists are still amazed by it today.
It's like they invented the smartphone before the landline. And we can't forget about China, right? Your sources mention that the first mechanical clock is attributed to the Chinese around 725 AD. And they also knew about gunpowder long before it reached Europe.
Right, but they mostly used it for fireworks, at least initially.
Yeah, more for celebrations than warfare.
Yeah.
And the scale of Chinese engineering projects is impressive. The Great Wall, obviously, but also the Grand Canal, which shows a huge capacity for planning and executing massive projects.
Definitely. It really challenges the image we have of a simple, ancient world.
Now let's delve into an area that always stirs up a lot of controversy and mystery. Those megalithic structures. Baalbek in Lebanon is one example that really stands out in your sources.
Oh, Baalbek. What an amazing place.
Totally. Your sources highlight the trilithon, which is like a wall made with 3 gigantic stone blocks,
Yeah, some of the largest stones ever used in construction, at least that we know of.
and the engineering required to place those stones. it's still a mystery today.
Totally. Renee Norbergen mentions that each stone is like 79 feet long, 15 feet thick, with an estimated weight that's just ridiculous. Imagine carrying something like that.
So how do they move these monster stones? Your sources bring up some interesting theories, from Regi observing the nearby quarries and the possible involvement of the Romans to the idea of using wooden rollers and iron casings.
Yeah, Reiji suggests that they separated the blocks at the quarry and then sort of tipped them onto a bed of earth.
Interesting.
And he mentions using wooden rollers, each one able to support around 20 tons, which would require, a really solid ground for the ramp.
Right.
And another idea is that they encase the blocks in cylindrical wooden and iron structures, almost like turning the stone into a giant rolling log.
And what about the idea of giant machine used to lift the stones? And those Lewis stones, which look like wedges with metal rings.
Right. It would have been a complex operation, needing a huge workforce all working together, like building this massive structure to hoist the stones, using at least 160 of those Lewis stones fitted into the top, plus tons of pulleys and a whole army of people pulling and lowering these behemoths.
Even just an inch at a time, that would be incredible.
An ant carrying a grain of sand, that's nothing compared to this.
And Baalbek isn't alone in this mystery of giant stones, right?
Right.
Your sources mention other sites built on top of even older ruins, like Cusco, the Acropolis, even the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And then we get into the whole Atlantis thing.
Yes, the lost city of Atlantis.
So fascinating.
The idea that these older constructions could be the work of, like, a super advanced people like the Atlanteans. And Cusco, with the Sacsayhuaman fortress, is another intriguing example.
Those perfectly fitted, massive stones with their many angles.
Right. No cement or mortar, just perfectly interlocked.
It's almost unbelievable. And the Incas themselves didn't really remember how or when it was built.
Yeah, it's like they just found it there, already made.
And Prodson noticed something really curious. The cut marks on the Sacsayhuaman stones are similar to those found on an unfinished Egyptian obelisk.
That's interesting.
So is it just a coincidence, or is there some kind of connection between these ancient civilizations?
This similarity that Prodson saw really raises questions about potential connections or shared knowledge between ancient civilizations, even those living far apart. Was there some kind of technological exchange happening back then?
Maybe they had conferences and stuff, sharing their latest innovations.
Who knows? It's fascinating to think about.
So, moving on a bit, but still talking about ancient sophistication, let's talk about observatories and calendars. Stonehenge is the classic example, and your sources bring up Hawkins' theory.
Stonehenge. Hawkins's book, Stonehenge Decoded, caused quite a stir in the archaeology world.
Yeah, his claim that it wasn't just a temple, but a sophisticated astronomical computer.
Right. He even mentions Diodorus, who talked about a British isle with a sacred site dedicated to Apollo, where the moon appeared close, and they observed a 19-year celestial cycle. Imagine the precision.
And Hawkins interpreted the Aubrey holes, those holes arranged in a circle, as a system for counting the years and predicting lunar movements.
Right, like a giant astronomical abacus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So much more complex than what we usually imagine.
Yeah, Hawkins's interpretation of the Aubrey holes as a year counting system suggests pretty advanced astronomical knowledge for the time. Initially, a lot of people criticized his ideas, like your source mentions, with that misdecoded article by Atkinson. But over time, our understanding of Stonehenge's purpose has evolved.
Typical, right. Resistance to new ideas.
This is all the time. But let's move on to an even more mysterious topic. Lost technologies and objects that just don't make sense within our historical timeline. You sent some pretty wild examples.
Oh, yeah. Stuff that'll make you question everything.
Okay, so the sources mentioned they discovered how to smelt iron around the 3rd millennium BC, but the quality was pretty poor initially, even worse than bronze.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they knew about metal alloys like electrum, tin, bronze, but platinum was a tough one to crack because of its extremely high melting point. And then the question arose, did all ancient iron objects come from meteorites, or did they actually know how to smelt the metal? Van der Merwe raises this interesting point.
And those findings that just don't fit into our neat little timeline, the Rhodesian man skull with a hole that looks like a bullet wound, is just shocking.
Yeah, the Rhodesian man skull with that smooth hole, no radiating cracks, it's pretty baffling. The conclusion that only a high-velocity projectile could have caused that is pretty startling.
Makes you wonder if the age of the skull is correct, or if, they had more powerful weapons back then than we give them credit for.
Totally, like finding an iPhone in Tutankhamun's tomb.
Exactly. And then there's the Koso artifact. a geode containing something that looks exactly like a modern spark plug.
I know, right?
The analysis Ron and Paul Willis did is fascinating, even though they admit no professional scientist thoroughly examined the object. But the resemblance to an electrical component is undeniable.
The colossal artifact is a real head-scratcher. You got something that looks like a modern spark plug inside a rock that's supposedly millions of years old. Yeah. The math just doesn't add up.
Doesn't add up at all. Yeah. And what about those other findings your sources mentioned? Like the bronze coin found 150 feet underground in Illinois, and the iron pot embedded in solid rock from Dorchester, Massachusetts.
Right.
This stuff totally messes with our chronology. And the Iron Pillar of Delhi, which hasn't rusted in centuries, is an example of ancient metallurgy that's just on another level. And that mummified gnome found in solid granite, that's just bizarre.
Yeah, these anomalous discoveries force us to rethink our historical narratives. The coin, the pot, the rust-resistant iron pillar, the gnome mummy, they're all examples of things that don't quite fit into our current understanding of the past.
Like finding a living dinosaur in your backyard. But maybe the most mind-blowing idea of all is the notion of self-operating machines and even robots in antiquity.
Robots.
Your sources talk about water pumps, cranes, catapults, water wheels, and even automatic toys and gadgets, like coin-operated machines and automatons.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's like they were already thinking about artificial intelligence.
So cool.
And those planetariums and astronomical models Cicero and Cedrenus mentioned, that machine Emperor Heraclitus showcased, representing the night sky with the planets and their orbits, must have been something out of this world.
Definitely. These astronomical models demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of mechanics and astronomy in the ancient world. They managed to replicate the movement of celestial bodies with complex gears and mechanisms.
Like having a 3D cinema of the universe thousands of years ago.
Exactly.
And then we get to the crown jewel, at least for me, the Antikythera Mechanism. Its discovery in 1900 is simply incredible.
Oh, the Antikythera Mechanism. Such a mind-blowing discovery. Found in a Greek shipwreck that sank in the 1st century BC, it's this incredibly complex device with interlocking gears and finely graduated inscriptions in ancient Greek.
It took scientists decades to figure out what it was for.
Right. It was so advanced for its time that it was almost unbelievable.
And its function. It was an astronomical calculator. It predicted the movements of celestial bodies with stunning accuracy, even though there are no contemporary descriptions of anything like it.
Right.
This suggests a level of scientific understanding that we may have completely underestimated. It's like they had a celestial Google Maps in ancient Greece.
Exactly. The complexity of the Antikythera mechanism, with its differential gears and its ability to predict eclipses and planetary movements, demonstrates scientific and technological sophistication far beyond what we thought possible for that period. It's proof that we barely scratch the surface when it comes to understanding the past.
And this leads to the question of whether they had access to heavy machinery to build all these massive structures. Your sources mention a gold artifact from Panama that resembles a bulldozer.
Yeah, that gold artifact found in ancient tombs in Panama is pretty interesting.
It's crazy, right?
Some people think it depicts a crocodile or a jaguar, but it has these parts that look mechanical, even gears.
It's so wild.
Sanderson mentions these gold ornaments kind of served as currency in ancient America, traveling long distances.
That's fascinating.
To find an object with this machine-like appearance in such old tombs really makes you wonder about the technology they had back then. Did they have golden bulldozers?
It sounds like science fiction, but it's in the sources you sent.
Right there in black and white, or gold, as it were.
And then we have the whole story of electricity and light in antiquity. The Baghdad Battery story is always fun to revisit.
Ah, the Baghdad Battery. Discovered by Dr. Wilhelm Koenig, it suggests they were using electric cells over 2,000 years ago, possibly for electroplating jewelry. Willard F.M. Gray even replicated the battery and proved it worked.
So the story that electricity only emerged in the 18th century isn't entirely accurate.
Seems that way. The electrolyte they used is still a mystery, but Gray's battery worked with copper sulfate. Acetic acid or citric acid, which they were familiar with, might have been even more efficient.
Imagine charging your phone with a 2,000-year-old battery.
Right. That would be something else.
And those accounts of brightly lit ancient temples, like the Temple of Jerusalem and the Roman Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek, illuminated by shining stones.
Yeah, there are these stories of ancient temples with intense illumination. Crossweight theorizes that the Egyptian Ka was related to electrical phenomena and that the teachings of mystery religions also involved electrical devices.
And those tales of perpetual lamps, burning for centuries without fuel, found in tombs and temples all over the world. They sound like fairy tales.
They really do. Your sources mention examples in Pallas's tomb, Numa Pompilius's temple, the temple of Jupiter Amun, Antioch, England, Travancore.
It's mind-boggling. And those luminous moons seen in lost cities, like near Gran Moxo in Brazil, it all sounds so otherworldly.
These stories of eternal lamps and mysterious lights in lost cities fuel the idea that ancient people may have had access to forms of energy and lighting beyond what we currently understand. Percy Fawcett's belief in a lost city in Brazil illuminated by those stones is an example of that. What if he was right?
And the theory that the Ark of the Covenant could have been an electrical device of Egyptian origin. Graham Hancock even suggested that Tutankhamun's nested sarcophagi might have been some kind of capacitor.
The theory that the Ark was an electrical device, possibly originating from the Great Pyramid, is pure speculation, but it's an intriguing idea. The whole nested sarcophagi as capacitors thing also falls into that realm of trying to find technological explanations for ancient artifacts.
It's like trying to plug a video game console into a clay outlet. And what about crystal lenses and how they manipulated light? Your sources agree that they knew how to make glass and crystal lenses.
Yeah, they had the skills to make lenses.
The Grail trees of Babylon with lenses and metal mounts, the biblical Thummim and Urim as crystals set in metal.
Right.
They could have used lenses to focus sunlight for fires, especially for religious rituals.
That's one possibility.
But some suggest that this might have been a secondary technology compared to electric light. And those stories of giant mirrors or lenses used in battles, like the Greek burning mirror and the Chinese yin-yang mirror, it's like having a solar-powered laser cannon in antiquity.
Mirrors that could set ships on fire from a distance.
Sounds like something out of Star Wars.
Definitely. And the mention of plasma technology as a possible ancient light or weapon source is interesting. Plasma technology, which can generate intense light and heat, is an area some researchers explore as a possible explanation for certain phenomena and accounts from antiquity.
I can see why. Modern experiments with plasma show that it's incredibly powerful. Who knows, maybe they already knew about this.
It's a possibility worth considering.
Now let's get to a topic that's always fascinated me. The possibility of flight and aerial combat in antiquity. Myths and legends are full of stories about flying carpets and chariots.
Oh yeah. Throughout history, we find tons of accounts of flight in myths and legends. Wan Hu in China attempted to fly using rockets.
Right. The story goes he strapped himself to a chair with 47 rockets and...
Not a good ending there.
No, not at all. But it shows they were already thinking about flying, and they already knew about some early forms of gunpowder and incendiary mixtures. But the discovery of a model bird in an Egyptian tomb in Saqqara with an aerodynamic design, as Dr. Khalil Messiah observed, is particularly intriguing. A glider from thousands of years ago. What about the story of Daedalus and Icarus? Maybe it wasn't just a myth. And Jim Woodman successfully recreated ancient hot air balloon technology and flew over the Nazca lines.
Wan Hu's attempt with rockets may have been tragic, but it shows they were thinking about flying. The Saqqara model suggests a surprising knowledge of aerodynamics. And Jim Woodman's success flying a hot air balloon over the Nazca region reinforces the idea that the ancients could see the lines from above.
Like an ancient drone.
Exactly.
And the religious texts that talk about flying vehicles, like the Vimanas in India. And the Babylonian epic of Etana, describing a flight to Anu's throne with details that resemble space travel.
Right. The ancient Indian texts describe Vimanas in great detail, talking about how they were built, how they functioned, and how they could even engage in aerial combat. The Epic of Etana, with its description of ascending to the heavens and seeing the Earth shrink below, is very similar to what astronauts describe today. It's like they had space tourism before us.
And the stories of lunar voyages we find in ancient Greek and Chinese texts, which align with what modern science has discovered about the moon. Chango's description of the moon as bright like glass, a luminous sphere, immense and very cold. The light of the moon comes from the sun, is eerily accurate for something written over 4,000 years ago. And that ship near the stars mentioned in ancient Chinese texts.
These ancient accounts of lunar voyages, with details that echo modern scientific discoveries, raise questions about the astronomical and perhaps technological knowledge they possessed. The idea of a ship near the stars suggests they were already thinking about venturing beyond our planet.
Who knows? Maybe they had a Chinese rocket up their sleeve.
It's a fascinating possibility.
And those flying Nagas from Sanskrit texts with their underground palaces lit by gems, and the concept of levitation that we see across different cultures, from Babylon and Egypt to Christian saints and Tibetan lamas, defying gravity. It sounds like magic.
The stories of flying Nagas and their illuminated underground palaces might be a way of describing advanced technologies. Levitation, the ability to overcome gravity, is a theme that appears in various cultures, with accounts ranging from religious feats to mystical practices. Alexandra David Neal even wrote about her experiences with levitation in Tibet. Did they have personal force fields?
And the incredibly well-planned cities of the Indus Valley civilization, showcasing advanced urban planning knowledge. And the detailed descriptions of Vimanas in ancient Indian texts, like the Samara Sutradhara and the Vaimanika Sastra, talking about construction, operation, propulsion, possibly mercury-based, and even aerial combat capabilities. Maharshi Bharwaj and Subraya Sastry seem to have left behind some ancient flight manuals.
The ancient Indian texts, especially the Vaimanika Sastra, provide incredible details about Vimanas, from how they were constructed and the different types of engines they used, including a possible mercury-based engine, to their maneuvering capabilities and even the weapons they employed.
Aerial battles, described in the Indian epics, like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, sounds like scenes from Star Wars, and that detailed description of a mercury vortex engine in the Vaimanika Sastra.
The descriptions of aerial battles in Indian epics, with weapons being launched from the sky, are pretty vivid. The Vaimanika Sastra details an engine that used a mercury vortex, including specific parts and instructions on how to make it work. It's like they had ancient missiles.
And Clendenon's theories about how this mercury vortex engine worked and how it could be connected to the UFOs we see today, and the story that a mercury-powered disk was tested at Area 51.
Clendenon believes this mercury vortex technology described in ancient Indian texts could be the principle behind many of the unidentified flying objects we've been seeing since 1947. He even suggests that Adamski's famous Stout ship might have been a Vimana. The story about them testing this technology at Area 51 is, of course, pure speculation, but it's a fascinating idea.
Mercury, the element of the gods, and the caduceus as a depiction of a mercury vortex propulsion device. It seems like the ancient Indian civilization might have had access to a technology of the gods. And Frederick Spencer Oliver mentioned an Atlantean Vimanaport in the Grand Teton Mountains.
The idea that mercury could have been a key element in advanced ancient technology is pretty intriguing. The mention of an Atlantean Vimanaport in the Grand Teton only adds to the mystery surrounding the possibility of flight and air travel in antiquity. Who knows, maybe we're walking over Atlantean airports and don't even know it.
Okay, this is all amazing, but let's move on to a slightly heavier topic.
Yeah.
Could there be evidence of wars fought with super powerful weapons in the ancient world? Your sources talk about deserts turned to glass, like the Libyan desert glass, and vitrified forts in Scotland. Could these be the marks of ancient atomic bombs?
The theory of ancient atomic wars is pretty controversial, but the discovery of vitrified deserts like the Libyan desert glass, LDG, and vitrified forts in Scotland raises some questions.
It's wild to think about.
The LDG is this super pure silica glass scattered over hundreds of square miles in the Libyan desert. Its purity and extent and the lack of any impact craters from meteorites are pretty strange. Kenneth Oakley wrote about the mystery of this desert glass.
And comparing it to glass formed by meteorite impacts, like in Watbar and Henbury, your sources show that the LDG is quite different. And that scarab carved from LDG found in Tutankhamun's tomb indicates they knew about and valued this material.
Right. The comparison with impact glass shows differences in composition and how the LDG is distributed. The fact that they found a scarab made from this glass in Tutankhamun's tomb suggests it was a material they were familiar with and used. Who knows for what purpose, right?
And those vitrified forts in Scotland, there are dozens of them. This vitrification process where huge blocks of stone are fused together is a real mystery.
The presence of over 60 vitrified forts in Scotland is quite an archaeological puzzle.
Initially, they thought it was caused by ancient volcanoes, but the locations of the forts don't match up.
Yeah, and Helen Nisbet suggests that the vitrification might not have been intentional.
And even though we know that wood fires can vitrify stone, the sheer amount of melted stone in some forts suggests something much more powerful was at play.
Right. The immense heat required for this to happen, reaching up to 1100 degrees Celsius, as shown by that team on Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World program, makes you question simple explanations.
And the mention of Greek fire as an ancient incendiary weapon that couldn't be extinguished. And D.D. Collins' books suggesting ancient wars fought with astronaut technologies like plasma weapons, fusion torches, even atomic bombs.
Greek fire was a super powerful incendiary weapon from antiquity. Collins's book, released in 1976, theorizes about ancient wars using technologies we associate with science fiction today, including plasma weapons, fusion, even weather manipulation, and massive energy explosions.
And that mention of environmental problems like ozone depletion and climate change back in 1976, before it became a major concern, is almost like a prediction of the future.
It really is. It's like someone traveled through time and left a warning.
And the Paiute legends of an underground city called Shinoav near Death Valley.
Interesting.
And the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, with theories suggesting atomic destruction based on the altered soil composition resembling Hiroshima.
The legends of underground cities and those alternative theories for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, comparing the soil alterations to Hiroshima, are pure speculation, of course.
Sure, but still thought-provoking. And the vitrified ruins found in the Ganges Valley and Mohenjo-daro, indicating intense heat without any volcanic activity nearby. It's like we're sitting on top of lost cities that were destroyed by weapons we don't even know about.
Those vitrified ruins in places like the Ganges Valley and Mohenjo-daro, without any evidence of volcanic activity, are definitely mysteries that lead to some out-of-the-box theories.
Okay, now let's get to something that really blew my mind in your sources. The precision of engineering and machining in ancient Egypt. How did they achieve that level of perfection in their stonework, using seemingly only copper tools?
The precision of stonework in ancient Egypt is on another level. Flinders Petrie already noticed that the methods they used were beyond our understanding at the time he made his discoveries. Christopher Dunn, as an engineer, focused on the tool marks and the precision that suggest advanced machining, not just some crude manual labor. It's like they had hidden precision machines back then.
Wire saws with abrasive materials to cut super hard stones. The perfection of the sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, even including a corrected overcut, shows incredible skill. Petrie even calculated the immense force needed to cut the granite.
Right. Dunn analyzed artifacts suggesting they used wire saws with some kind of abrasive powder to wear down the stone. The precision of the sarcophagus in the king's chamber, including that corrected cut, shows incredible control and skill. And the force Petrie calculated would be necessary to cut the granite makes you doubt that copper tools alone could have done the job.
And those examples of artifacts that appear to have been made with advanced drilling techniques, like tubular drilling and the creation of perfect spheres. And Dunn's theory that they use some kind of ultrasonic machining, talking about the properties of quartz.
Dunn proposes that they use some pretty advanced drilling techniques, like tubular drilling, which created holes with cores. He believes it could have been something like ultrasonic machining, where the rapid vibration of quartz helped the tool to erode the stone, like a supersonic drill.
And those granite boxes in the Serapeum tunnels. The difficulty of installing and finishing them in such confined spaces suggests they had to achieve ultra-precision on-site to account for the granite's expansion and contraction with temperature changes. Dunn even tried to measure how straight and flat the surfaces were using a precision straight edge and monochromatic light, showing an almost perfect finish.
Those granite boxes in the Serapeum, with their size and the precision of their finish, would be a challenge even for us today.
I can imagine.
The need to do the final finishing on-site to ensure perfection, considering how granite changes with temperature, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of working with this material. And Dunn's attempts to measure the box's perfection using optical standards only reinforces the idea of unbelievable precision.
And Eric Lather's assessment from Truestone Corp about the feasibility of creating these artifacts with modern precision granite manufacturing technology. And the measurements Dunn took of a large black granite block, revealing a consistent radius that points to the use of rotary cutting tools.
The opinion of a modern expert in precision granite manufacturing like Eric Lather on the difficulty of replicating those Egyptian artifacts with current technology only highlights how advanced their work was. And Dunn's measurements showing a perfect radius on a granite block suggest they used tools that rotate with incredible precision. It's like they had a high-tech stone lathe.
And Dunn's conclusion that the pyramid builders possessed engineering and stoneworking capabilities far exceeding our own, including this routine precision machining of hard igneous rock. It seems like Occam's razor doesn't always apply when we talk about Egyptian constructions.
Dunn argues that the simple explanations often given by Egyptologists just can't account for the precision and the marks we find on those artifacts. He believes the ancient pyramid builders had a knowledge and skill in stoneworking that we can barely imagine today.
And this brings us to Dunn's even more controversial theory, the Great Pyramid as a power plant. A power plant harnessing the Earth's vibrations to generate electricity for their entire civilization, including the machines they used for stone shaping.
Dunn's theory that the Great Period was a power plant capturing the Earth's vibrations is pretty radical. He points to those unfinished granite beams above the king's chamber, with 3 smooth sides and a rough top, suggesting they were designed to vibrate at a specific resonant frequency.
So the bat holes that Piazzi Smith mentioned could have been related to tuning those beams for resonance, and John Stuart Reid's cymatic experiments demonstrating the resonant properties of the king's chamber, and Christopher Horn's experiment tuning his flute to the resonant frequency at 438 hertz, produced by striking the sarcophagus.
Dunn believes the beam's features, including those possible holes, were meant to fine-tune the resonance. The experiments by Reid and Horn with the acoustic properties of the king's chamber and the sarcophagus seem to support the idea that the place had specific resonance characteristics. It's like tuning a giant musical instrument.
And the flint stone Piri found beneath the sarcophagus, suggesting it was placed there before any forced entry, and Dunn's comparison of the Grand Gallery to a Helmholtz resonator.
The flint stone under the sarcophagus suggests it was placed there when the pyramid was still intact, which could be related to the chamber's acoustic properties. Dunn compares the Grand Gallery to a Helmholtz resonator, with the stone blocks acting as resonators, like a giant sound box.
And the step design of the Grand Gallery, the possibility of controlling energy levels, and the ascending passage with the granite plugs, implying they could control the system's energy externally. And Petrie's observation that the faces of the ascending passage blocks are uneven, perhaps to modify sound waves.
The shape of the Grand Gallery and the granite plugs in the ascending passage could have been mechanisms to control and direct energy within the pyramid. The unevenness of the block's faces in the ascending passage could have been intentional, a way to manipulate sound waves. It's like having an architectural equalizer.
Wow, so much to digest. But your sources bring in one more layer of mystery with Edgar Cayce's readings about Atlantean technology.
Cayce's psychic readings about Atlantis describe a civilization with super advanced technology, including ships of the air and other forms of transportation. He mentions people in past lives who were like pilots and engineers of these aircraft.
Sounds like something out of an ancient science fiction movie. And that description of a central power source in Atlantis, a massive cylindrical crystal housed in a non-conductive domed structure with a sliding section to capture celestial energies, and how this concentrated energy was used to power vehicles remotely, like radio control.
Cayce described a central crystal of power in Atlantis, used to gather cosmic energy and distribute it to power vehicles and other technologies remotely using a process.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.